Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to take some deep and multifaceted social issues and just barely skim the surface of them with the Eriq LaSalle-driven psychological thriller Crazy as Hell. For more interesting videos of Eriq LaSalle boning down, maybe subscribe to the channel? Who knows what the future holds? Let's get to it. We open in a bedroom, and as we pan across, we find clear evidence this space belongs to an organized, successful, and well-traveled individual. Despite all this, he is a sad man, and based on this apparent hallucination, his sadness is derived from the loss of a child. We then find Dr. Adams arriving at a state psychiatric hospital, where he has a scheduled meeting with a Dr. DeLazzo. We learn through their conversation that Adams is a hotshot therapist who has arrived to partake in a documentary to be filmed on premise. This meeting is the final screening, as Dr. DeLazzo is not totally convinced that he's the man for the job, as he's prone to the type of flashy pop psychology that DeLazzo finds reckless and distasteful. So DeLazzo recommends he stay in his lane and keep his nose clean, because the filming will be
a 30-day shoot, 24/7 surveillance and observation of me and 10 consented patients.
As they begin their tour, we find out that Sinbad's here, and he's gonna be around, but his overall impact on the plot will remain uncertain. Adams is then shown his fully furnished room, and he gets to know his surroundings by touching absolutely everything. And then he walks into a hallucination that shakes him to his core. After brushing this off, he's given a tour of the facility where he meets the patients at zoo time, where they're given basically free reign of an open pen with no structure whatsoever. The camera then takes a little tour of the chaos as we enjoy some copyright-free music that really sets the tone in a delightful manner. Since this will be Adam's ward, he takes the opportunity provided by a patient who tries to make him uncomfortable to completely dominate her emotionally, thereby exerting his authority. Then he meets the director of the documentary, Parker, who's a huge fan of his work and uses their conversation to puke a bunch of exposition into his face. This is a hidden eye style documentary. There's going to be cameras all over, and their intention is to just melt into the background, leaving him to do his thing. Then they work their way down the hall where each new patient has a different, totally unique affliction, but all are managed through medication, which goes against Dr. Adams' methodology. Then he meets Cheryl, a patient who has proven hard to tame, even with medication, and he steps up to demonstrate his mastery of the human psyche in all its forms. As they discuss her later in Adams' office, we see these two men of power try to convince each other of the best path forward for her treatment. We and they both realize they're playing a delicate game of chess, figuratively and literally. Then a new patient arrives in the night, a high-functioning and fashionable man who admitted himself for reasons unknown. Ready to crack that nut, Adams walks in and they commence with the introductions.
Hello, Dr. Adams. My name is Satan.
Pardon? He quickly insists that while he's there, he be treated as Satan, rather than as someone who thinks he's Satan. He reveals he's feeling blue due to everyone blaming him for everything bad that happens in the world. But why a hospital instead of a therapist? Well, you see, Dr. Adams' soul turns him on, and he wants him to accept his hopeless life, hoping this will, in turn, prove the hopelessness of humankind. It's a simple plan, really. I'm not sure why there's so many questions about it. In his debrief with DeLazzo, we learn that he's very excited about this new challenge. So right away, Satan is included in his primary group of patients he intends to get fully functional in the next 30 days. A lofty goal, and Parker is incredulous. But you don't ever challenge Dr. Adams. He'll make you eat those words. So he and Parker bet on his success. He begins observing and treating the patients in various capacities, unraveling the bonds that wrap up their brains via pure logic. For you see, all it really takes to cure someone of a delusion and free them of their trauma is the right line of reasoning to convince them otherwise. But he learns from DeLazzo that he's on well-worn ground here, and the revelations he's pulling out of his patients are actually not uncovering anything they haven't already discovered before. But this doesn't faze him. In fact, the only thing that really sidetracks him are his own occasional full-on hallucinations, which often require him to take a soft 20 to regroup. While doing so, he engages in a personal interaction that is surely being caught on film. Soon enough, he's back with Satan where they talk and philosophize, eventually ending up in the commissary where the discussion turns to life and each other's interests and hobbies. But the dialogue is cut short when they hit Adams on his hip with a 911 page. Things are popping off with Cheryl. Adams steps in and decides that the only way to tame this wild horse is to take her off her meds. You know, get her back to base level so he can unravel her twisted psyche. They have to start this with a blood sample, requiring Adams to entwine his limbs among hers before he expertly performs the medical procedure. Meanwhile, Satan, preparing for his riding lessons apparently, looks on. Once this is settled, DeLazzo lets him know he's got a short leash on this one. No problem, because with step 1 in the bag, Adams proceeds to step 2, connecting with Cheryl over his dead daughter's dolphin plushie. I mean, when she wakes up with that, she's sure to cooperate with him and stop being traumatized. While taking a break, Satan strolls on up to the old piss trough and hikes up his skirt. They have some playful goading about the devil being non-binary, depending on the needs of the situation, and Adams just soaks him in. But for real, his eyes wander hard and often. Unperturbed by his manly gaze, Satan congratulates the doctor on his success with Cheryl. Adams then breaks trust by entering his living quarters and touching everything, making off with a potentially damning article. But it's all good. He gets retroactive permission from Satan, who catches him and welcomes him to take whatever he'd like. He's motivated to try to figure out Satan's true identity, and he instantly tattles about what he found to DeLazzo. But this conversation is short-lived, as there's a tremendous ruckus emanating from the ward. When they explore, we find Eriq LaSalle using his film as a talent vehicle to show off the joy with which he expresses himself through the art of dance, moving his body in rhythm with something, and his gyrations ultimately cause a downright frenzy among the population. We then find them on an experimental field trip. Dr. Adams thinks it'll help acclimate them to society by putting them in it well ahead of their relative preparedness. Here, Satan chooses to press Dr. Adams to talk about his dead wife and daughter. Adams doesn't talk personal talk, however, and he chooses to completely write off the devil, resulting in dangerous dagger eyes. Now angered, Satan evokes chaos to prove a point about who's actually in control here. In a brief interlude, we learn that Adams sent off some of Satan's items for fingerprinting, but each finger came back matching a different terrible person through history, confounding their attempts to identify him. We then learn that after the failed experiment at the park, DeLazzo is ready to cut Satan loose. To the contrary, however, now that he's demonstrated an actual danger to others, Adams is determined to get another crack at him. This instigates another hallucination in which his wife tries to convince him that he can't fix everything, and the animated conversation is captured again on film. The next morning, your boy gets up early and works through that deep burn. As he espouses about the power of the mind, Parker tries to get a little deeper with him and starts to ask him about his decision to treat his own schizophrenic daughter, which went poorly and resulted in her death and the death of his wife. Turns out, this is a bit of a trigger for Adams, and they get exactly the level of drama they were hoping for out of him. Meanwhile, Cheryl continues to deteriorate as she goes through withdrawal. In his method, he sets her loose to trash her room until she gets all tuckered out, a vital therapeutic step. But DeLazzo has had enough of this dog and pony show, insisting that she be put back on the meds. So Adam plays a little trick on him, agreeing to do so, and then spending a few hours by himself in the bathroom, crushing up aspirin to put in her pills. Later that night, he's awoken by a shrieking banshee somewhere down the halls. He finds it emanating from Satan's room, where a quick peek confirms he is providing immeasurable pleasure to his orderly. I can't show it to you here, but it is quite erotic. He has to get all the gritty deets on this, so he follows her into the city, where she ducks into an underground club of debauchery. He eventually catches up with her on the dance floor, where she's busy sweating out the funk. They find a quiet place to converse, and he tries to see if Satan revealed anything to her that may help identify who he actually is. All she really knows is that he goes to deliver food to some old lady a couple of times a week. So the next morning, we find him waking up in his car outside the house, which he found somehow. And then we watch him talk his way in via the filmmakers who are watching him. He returns from this trip at the same time the Popo are rolling up to the hospital. Cheryl has wreaked havoc in the ward and is now on the roof. Still determined to prove the efficacy of his treatment, Adam hops up there ahead of the police and locks the hatch behind him. He tries to talk her down, and it's not going super well. But then Satan shows up and starts to really agitate things. We discover that Dr. Adams has an internal need to save her, as he views her in a similar light to his daughter. But Cheryl says, "Screw your daughter," and floats off the side of the building. And just like that, Satan is gone, as are, apparently, the police. When Satan emerges from the shadows, a fight ensues, in which Adams humanizes him by shouting his family history in his face. The lady he visited was Satan's mom, so Adams knows he's just a confused man, destined to die like a dog like the rest of us. We then cut to DeLazzo running some interference in the whole Cheryl situation in an attempt to cover his own ass and protect his facility and career. And soon Adams is packing, the documentary now over. He's preparing to go, but then Mr. Barnett, aka Satan's mother, arrives just in time. As she's bearing a gift she wants Adams to give to her son, and if she had gotten there 5 minutes later, he would have already been gone. Anyway, she hands him a basket of apples, which is just dripping with metaphor. Sure enough, the room is empty, and the mom was the devil we see. So he gives chase and finds himself back in his own bedroom right at the moment we last saw him there. So that's nice and familiar. This time we get to learn new and interesting things, like that the pool of blood from before was actually his blood, from dying after he scratched his neck a little with his ceremonial knife. He then enters an adjacent room and finds Bohemian-style Dr. DeLazzo with a selection of some of his best friends, but with various forms of physical trauma on their faces and bodies. It's a horrifying scene that I'm sure means something, and Adams goes down while resisting his fate to the very end, hopeful that he'll be remembered as a good man.
I'm a good man!
Repeating this phrase to the point where it becomes uncomfortable to watch. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. I'd like to take a moment to give a huge thanks to my donors, memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. Crazy as Hell was an interesting romp through the mind of Eriq LaSalle. I'm glad he got to make it, but I also wish the musical selections had been a bit better. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.